All right, well, welcome again. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Jill Archie. I am the creator of 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏, which is a small self-publishing company, and I am working on putting up a lot of educational materials for writers to be able to help them on their self-publishing journey. I do have a self-publishing course that I am launching that takes writers from basically notebook to real book. So all those steps throughout the whole process, from formatting your book, the editing and proofreading, getting your author biography, your cover design done. So all of that included in one. This video will go up on YouTube and we'll put all of that information for you to connect in the video description. So that is just a little bit about me. And I'd like to introduce our special guest today is Stephen London. He is coming all the way from Bulgaria. So we thank you very much for coming all this way. And a little bit about Stephen is that prior to his editing career, he served in the United States Army for nearly 10 years. So thank you so much for your service. And your academic credentials include 2 bachelor's degrees, one in international relations and the other in diplomacy. He holds a master's degree in English with a focus on professional writing. And he also graduated from the European Academy of Diplomacy with a specialization in international security. So pretty interesting background there. As a Purple Heart recipient, he advocates for veterans issues, and he currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the New York City Daily Post, where he seeks to raise journalistic standards in digital media. Stephen's passion for editing revolves around his desire for lifelong learning, and his other passions include philosophy, art, and travel. So thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And what I'm going to do also is, if you would like to contact Stephen with any further questions or anything like that, we will also put his contact information in the follow-up email as well as in the description of this video, so you can contact him. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the questions. The first one I had was, what is your general process when you are working for a writer, Stephen? What can they expect? How do you do that in particular?
To answer the question about the general process I would follow as a developmental editor with a writer, one of the first things that I ask writers to consider, is to send me a part of their writing that they find particularly challenging or that they're having some kind of difficulty with. Absent of that, usually I might ask for something from the middle of their manuscript, again, depending on what they're writing. And from the process, from the beginning until the end, I do my best to be available and kind of guide the writers in keeping with their voice, because that's also one of the areas I focus on. A story or a manuscript, that's the writer's voice, not the editor's voice. So we're just guides in that sense. And that's how I might start off with that first question, Jill.
One thing to ask you, I thought real quick, was, do you work primarily with fiction or nonfiction, or is it a combination of both?
So I primarily work with nonfiction. So I come from an academic editing background. I'm not opposed to fiction. I'd rather read it than edit it. And I'd have to say that I am not the choice editor for a romance novel. So I'll just make bubbles right there.
That's all right. We all have our specialties. Yeah. So as you're working with a writer, so you've set up the process and everything, what kind of feedback do you typically give to the writer? What does that look like? And how do you give that?
Okay. So some of the feedback that a writer can expect from a developmental editor. Imagine that the developmental editor is going to focus on the big picture, the complete picture of your manuscript or your story. This might include things like plot holes, your character description or arcs, finding if dialogue is accurate to the location. So, for example, if you're writing a story with a character from Louisiana in the States, you might actually want to try to find a developmental editor from that region who might actually have that expertise in Creole or Cajun for example. Some other things that a developmental editor will provide for feedback: structure and style. Okay, so letting you know, I'll say it very diplomatically, where the areas for improvement are. Okay, so in feedback, when you receive feedback from a developmental editor, don't think of it as criticism of your work of art, but it's more guidance, and it's another perspective that you can take. And in the end, it'll be your choice whether you take the advice and recommendations, but that's kind of how feedback can be tailored for writers.
So do you, when you're giving feedback, do you also include any type of, what was the question with Kara? Do you include bibliography or citation feedback as well if it is nonfiction? Do you go that in depth?
So I would say that when it comes to citations and, let's say, research editing, I'll coin it that way. That's actually, I would say, more of a very niche kind of editor, one that's going to check those citations, making sure that your formatting and your authorities and everything are correct. You can find a developmental editor that will put forth that work for you. And I know that this will jump ahead to a future question, but I'll just foreshadow it here. It's going to be one of the things as a writer that you're going to want to discuss towards the beginning with your editor, as far as expectations go.
Cool. Perfect. Yeah. We can go ahead and talk about that. What kind of expectations can someone expect when they start out?
Ooh. What a loaded question. No, it's a very good question. So for some of the expectations a writer can have, I'll just start with generalizing it into two areas. We have the expectations that we know, and the expectations we don't even know what to expect. So the questions that we don't know to ask. In terms of the questions that we do know to ask as writers, we can also, to kind of foreshadow to a future question here, we can ask about the experience that the editor has. Are they experienced in that particular genre or topic? How long have they edited in that area? So I don't want to take away from the future question there, but yeah, that's how I would start with an answer for that.
Cool. How do you provide the edits to the writer? Do you just work primarily through email? Do you do phone or Zoom conversations? What do you find the most effective ways to communicate that feedback?
So for me as an editor, I find the most effective way to communicate is whichever way your client, your customer, your writer, whatever makes them feel comfortable. So some people prefer email, others a Zoom like we're on right now. For myself, I come from a paper and pen editing style, and I had to learn to digitize myself. So using applications like Google Docs, for example, where a writer can see real-time edits, which is also another consideration you might want to look at as a writer. Applications like Google Docs will allow you to see the real-time edits and the feedback that your editor provides. For myself, I have a preference for word tracking. I love writing in the margins, the comments, and just writing the suggestions that way.
Cool. Awesome. No, that's great. Let's talk about timelines. What can a writer expect for, I mean, it's probably different for every editor too, in their own pace, but kind of what can you expect with that and how does that look?
Okay, so when we talk about the timeline for editing a book, there will be some areas that we need to focus on to get a better estimation. One of the obvious ones will be word count. Okay, so if you have a manuscript that is 100,000 words, I'll just simplify it for everybody. If your editor can edit 3,000 or 4,000 words a day without losing any quality, then you're looking at about a month, okay? Now, another factor that also plays into this in terms of editing, and even outside of developmental editing, but definitely one of the steps, it depends on where you are in the editing process. Is this your first draft? Has it ever seen somebody else's eyes outside of a close family member or friend? So a first draft will arguably, to say it nicely, will arguably take longer for your editor to go through and make these suggestions versus something that might be closer towards a final draft.
Cool. And I know with like developmental or content editing, it is focusing on that story and that structure. Do you recommend typically to a writer that they go through a copy editor first, or someone besides themselves having that kind of edit before they go to developmental, or which way would you kind of put that order?
That's an amazing question. I might relay that answer to personal preference. For myself, even as an editor, I know that I'm capable, but when it comes to your own writing, it's always better to have another set of eyes, if not more than one set of eyes. And each of those eyes, they don't need to be editors, but the more feedback you can get, the more critique and criticism, that will really help you develop. I think I see that there's a
Yeah, let's go
question.
ahead and do that. We'll just jump in. Kara asked, as a developmental editor, how many passes do you give for a manuscript that has been seen by no one?
Okay, so again, this should be something that you and your editor will agree on towards the beginning. If you think of it as a contract between you and your editor. And that doesn't mean that just because in the beginning you and the editor agreed to 3 rounds, that you'll only get 3 rounds. You can find an editor who's flexible and offers things like that. For myself, I usually feel pretty confident that I can get pretty good editing within 3 rounds. So I try to target myself for 3 rounds to return something that's near publication ready for the author.
Cool, that's great. So speaking of contracts, do you put together full contracts, and is it just written out in an email so you have it written down, or do you actually do some kind of e-sign or whatever like that? How formal are you with those contracts?
So for me, I attempt to be as, I don't want to say informal, but I attempt to break down the barrier of the editor and the writer as much as I can. So I can do this, I can manifest this by just asking questions in the beginning. When do you want to publish? What do you expect from an editor? Have you used an editor before? So you can do this through a series of questions to get the answers you need, or if you're more tech savvy, sending a fillable PDF. Oh gosh, wouldn't that be amazing? Just to click a few things and e-sign and you're done. That would be the ultimate efficiency for me.
Sure. Cool. Thank you. That's great. Awesome. Well, let's see. Let's go into a little bit more personal. What is your favorite book that you've edited and why?
Okay. So yeah, I was really thinking about this question a little bit, and it's not a book yet, and I'll still check in with the author, but I'll explain it a little bit. So every year, I try to give back as an editor, and if I have some free time, I like to offer pro bono editing. Of course, I'm probably not going to do a full book that way, but if time permits, it's definitely plausible. And this one author, she's British, and she put together her manuscript about childhood autism and what we can learn from it, how we can manage it, the expectations. And because this is not a field that I would say that I'm overly competent in, I also had to research a few things, such as sources. I know that this was a previous question. So when she referenced other case studies or medical professionals, I researched that. But one thing that I really enjoyed, I enjoyed the amount of energy, and you can tell from a writer. An editor can tell how much passion a writer has for the project, just through the words they use. And I really enjoyed working with that project while I did. And yeah, it even had another challenge, which most people in the United States probably don't consider very often, but also good advice. Uh, Before you publish, consider your audience, okay? And this is one of the things that you can speak with your editors about. For example, this woman, British English. So to simplify it, there's a few extra letters and words like color and favor. And one of the questions I asked her, it included, who do you see reading this book primarily? Do you want me to focus my editing with British English, with that spelling and that grammar? Or would you like me to focus on more North American or US English? So she chose to focus on American English. And so as I went through her manuscript, I had to make some of my notes to find some of these words and to go through, because I live in Europe, so I'm also used to British English. But yeah, that was a very enjoyable challenge. And yeah, I really enjoyed editing that manuscript.
How cool. That's very neat. Well, then on the flip side, let's go to lessons learned for writers too. What was the most challenging book that you have edited? And why was that? Either the process or the book itself?
Yeah, so kind of to touch a little bit on what Jill does with putting out a checklist that writers can use throughout their process from, I'm going to steal your phrase, from notebook to real book. When I was in university during my undergrad, one of the university clubs that I started, it was called the Writers Guild. And the idea behind it was to give people a chance at writing, editing, design, marketing, all of these different aspects that surround a book that we as editors or writers might overlook, because there's a lot more than just the author's name on the front cover. And for one of the projects that we were debating, we put out some feelers for it. And it's a book called Mortal Men, Immortal Warriors. And it's about some of the service members that I served with in Afghanistan, one of my former Army units. They maintained almost 7 continuous years in Afghanistan through rotating out soldiers. And we came up with this project idea to try to bridge a gap in understanding between civilian and military, and to offer another perspective outside of the history book or a journalistic article that you might expect. So one of the biggest challenges for me with editing that, it was being so close to some of the topic matter. So usually your editor is kind of far removed from a manuscript. They don't normally touch things so close to home. So that was one of the challenges. And another challenge, and this is more of a style change, and I will tell you as writers, never get offended by reviewer number 3. I'll just call them reviewer number 3. When we published the book, and it went through the circuit for different awards and competitions, one of the reviewers, reviewer number 3, wrote that the grammar was poor and there were spelling errors. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wait, how did I possibly do that? And I went and looked back, and the reason there were these spelling errors was because we were trying to keep the person's voice as authentic as possible. And if you're in the United States, if you can imagine someone with a Southern drawl who says y'all and used to, could, be able to, I'll know, things like this, that's how we wrote that's how we edited their part to keep it authentic. So yeah, I would say that that was probably the most challenging one I've worked on so far. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting there. So why did you initially decide to go into editing? What's your motivation for doing this? Why do you like to help other writers with their work?
So I would probably say that I made the journey from writing to editing. And I probably started making that journey towards my time in undergrad, being overseas as a native English speaker. It's kind of a high demand to check theses or to check a paper to make sure everything looks and sounds correct. And so that was kind of my beginning into it. And then as I pursued my master's in professional writing, I had a chance that really opened up my perspective beyond writing and the different styles of editing. So technical editing or copy editing, things like this. And from there, one of our university assignments, it was a technology-based assignment. And for myself, I'm a little bit slower on the tech side, much better on the editing. And we had to create a website. And this is actually what I created as, I say, my first editing business out here. That's where it came from. And as I went through the course and I learned how to write for the web, which is a completely different style of writing, it really inspired me to transition into editing and to continue to help develop other writers along their path.
Cool. That's awesome. Cool. And the last question that I have is, what advice would you give to a first-time writer who has never ever worked with an editor before and they're putting that out there for the very first time? What would you tell them?
All right. So I would probably give some of my bullet points, and definitely not an all-inclusive list. But these are some of the areas that I would consider. One of the first things I would consider, does your editor work within your genre? Now, this doesn't necessarily disqualify an editor, but as Jill has mentioned before, just like writers, different editors also have different strengths and preferences, okay? And I would separate the strengths and preferences point there. So for example, myself, I like to read about politics or diplomacy, philosophy, art, but I am not the best choice for the next Harlequin romance novel. I think I'm very low on that. That's if you can't find any editors, then maybe. So seeing if your editor fits your genre, that would be one point. Another point, and again, this is very preferential to the writer, ask for recommendations. Ask the editor if you can speak with anyone that they have edited for before, or ask to see their portfolio if they have a portfolio. Again, I would take this with a grain of salt because sometimes you also have brand new editors. They haven't built a portfolio, or they're in the process of it, or maybe they don't have a website for you to view this, okay? But yeah, finding recommendations and seeing that their credentials match to your needs or your requirements, I think that that would be very sound advice. Another thing, you can ask for a sample edit. Most editors will provide a sample edit, not just out of the goodness of their heart, but also this helps an editor realize if they are a good fit for you, and vice versa, okay? So for example, some editors might write very long notes on how to develop everything. Others are more concise. Some take longer to return feedback and edits. Others are very quick, okay? Because maybe they don't have such a heavy workload. So asking for a sample edit. One area that a lot of independent writers don't often consider as a whole, consider your budget. This is also something to consider as a writer. It's not necessarily related to editing exactly, but editors have a job also, and you will find quite a wide range of different fees that an editor might charge, whether it's by word or by hour. For me, my personal recommendation is to find an editor that will charge by word, okay? I find that usually works better for the writer. Let's see, another one, yes, also going into the professional credentials. And if I can recommend this association, it's not the only one, but they also have a lot of good information for editors and writers. I believe it's called the Editorial Freelancers Association.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have different job boards for the editors, and you can contact and find people. I believe on that one, you can find an editor that works within your genre or within your topic area. Yeah, so those would be some of the bullet points. And to kind of wrap it up, this is my own point as an editor. And I know that every editor has different characteristics or qualities, but being in the Army, we really love acronyms. So I'm going to give you the acronym ACE, okay? So how to find an ACE editor, all right? You want to look for someone who is adaptable, someone who's concise, and someone who's going to be empathetic, okay? So remember, at the end of the day, your manuscript is your work of art. You will be the one that makes the choice whether you take the recommendations or the opinions given, the feedback from the editor. And I would say with that, as first-time writers, that would be a good way to start.
That's excellent. Thank you. I love that acronym. That's great. It's good thing to remember, easy to remember too. I really love that. So awesome. Well, that is the questions that we had prepared. Did anyone else have anything else, any other questions that they had? You can go ahead and shoot them in the comments and we can go from there.
And can I unmute myself?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so instead of just having to type it all out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yes. So the question really is, in the very beginning of the digital platform development, self-publishing had a really negative connotation to it. Have either of you seen that kind of an evolution towards a more positive image of it, or just because it's become more prominent? Just kind of what's your general perception of self-publishing in relation to, rather than, submitting to a traditional publishing house?
I'll talk about the strengths and disadvantages of this from my viewpoint. I'll start with some of the strengths. As far as technology goes, within the last 10 years, for example, access to different programs that can help from formatting your book to designing covers. This has really increased. So this has brought up some of the professionalism or the professional appearance that typically might not have been available to independent writers before. For some of the weaknesses, and I don't mean this to speak badly on independent writers, because I've been there myself as well. It's a learning process. But for example, let's say that you are publishing, self-publishing through Amazon as an example. When it gets to the point where you select your ISBN, that nice barcode that every book needs to have, a lot of writers will just go for the free provided one, okay? And that's Amazon's ISBN. That's completely different than if you go to, I think it's 𝗙𝗨𝗥𝗚𝗏.
Owker.
𝗙𝗨𝗏 is like the only authorized one. If you buy them in bundles, usually like 10 at a time, and they're good forever until they're used. So if an independent author wants to raise their standard to the level of a traditionally published book, they're going to want to invest probably a little bit more time and a little bit more money into some of the other areas, whether it is cover design or book marketing, even hiring a formatter for the inside. Jill and I were talking about jagged edges versus justified. I don't want to admit on Zoom how long it took me to realize that justified was
Me
an
too.
option.
Me too.
But I'll admit, even as an editor. But yeah, overall though, I think that the credibility of independent publishing, I think it's increasing. It's another way for people to share their stories and their experiences, and readers are really picking up a lot on these indie books more and more. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if the author treats their book like a business and kind of trying to separate that emotion, which is always really hard, but separating that and really seeing their book as a product and their readers as customers can kind of help you elevate your book. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot more of as well, is because that was always me as well, was trying to make sure it didn't look like self-published for my books that I've published on my own. I wanted to add that elevated cover, even, I mean, the book description, but also everything formatted as well. And so I think if you treat it like a small business, you can earn your way to having more of a competitive product. And obviously the publishing houses, I think, will still be around for quite a long time, but we've just even seen the rise in entrepreneurship in general in the last 20, 30 years really boom. And it's a big thing, easier to be a freelance, whatever, fill in the blank. So I think there's a lot more people out there doing it. And obviously that means you get the good and the bad in that. But I think if you're intentional as an author to know your strengths and weaknesses, especially when it comes to book cover design or formatting, obviously I really believe that anything can be learned, but like it is crucial to have a second pair of eyes. You can only see your manuscript from one perspective. So it is crucial to have someone else look at that. But there may be things in formatting that you can learn, but you're going to need to take the time and investment, like Stephen said, to be able to do that. So that's my observations as well.
Can I add one more thing onto that?
Yeah,
as well?
definitely.
So, and this is definitely debatable, but it's just food for thought. Traditional publishing doesn't always guarantee success. So, for example, traditional publishers get it wrong sometimes also, okay? They're making a bet on what they think readers will like. And I've seen, and it's not my area to ever edit, but I've seen, for example, science fiction or romance writing series where people have developed a series of 8 or 9 books. And basically because they've developed these characters and everything over time, the books start helping to market the other books of the series. And I've seen some very successful authors that they went the independent route and they never looked back. So yeah, I think it's preference.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the goal for your book as well. Because you may have a couple books you want to get out there. Maybe there's something you want to just share with them, kind of a media audience, and want to get it out there through self-publishing. And then maybe there's another book you have in mind that you just feel should go the traditional route. So I think don't put yourself in that box either, and just kind of look at each book individually, or even a series. I want this series I want to see if I can get that in traditional publishing or vice versa. But yeah, so I think it's just don't put yourself in that box. Don't limit yourself, and be open to different opportunities, because you never know when one's going to rise either. You might meet someone at a conference or a writers group or anything like that, and you may not have considered traditional publishing, and then you share your story idea with that person, whether an agent or a publisher, and all of a sudden that you got an offer that you weren't expecting. So you never know when that opportunity is going to come up. So I think just be open for that as well. So any other questions?
As an editor, whenever you submit your, let's say track changes to the writer, how much of those track changes do you expect the writer to accept? So for instance, you do a developmental edit and the writer comes back and is like, yeah, I really don't like this. I don't agree with you on this. I don't agree with you on that. But you're right as an editor. Like it's not like a debatable topic. It's like verb tense or whatever. How do you like navigate those type of situations?
Oh, that's a very excellent question. So this comes down to, I'll say, effective or proper communication. And as a writer needs to know their audience that they're going to write for, whether it's themselves or a certain group of people, an editor also needs to kind of learn how to communicate more effectively with the writer. So some people might be very open to critique and criticism, and others kind of shy away from it. So even just from a writing standpoint, your choice of words. And I've had, I can tell you a personal example. I've helped people also edit their resumes, for example, or cover letters, things like this, because they're looking for a new job, and they've given me something that has all these great ideas, but we have to narrow it down. And then you have to explain why we narrow it down and why each different part serves its own function. And I think that when you explain something without making somebody feel like an idiot or belittling them, they're going to be much more open to taking that criticism. And that's one of the methods that I attempt to use as an editor, and most of the time it's worked. I've had the majority of my own edits accepted. So
that's great. I like what Sarah added, a quick comment that she leaves it up to the writers whether they want to take the advice or not, and the edits or not, but also that she's willing to hop on Zoom or have those additional conversations to discuss and say, well, this is what I was really meaning. And because, yeah, you're still working on that communication for the first or second time with someone that you've never met. So sometimes just clearing it up or getting the facial expressions and that sort of thing can also make a big difference. So that's a good extra point there. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for the input. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For writers, what are your thoughts about paying third-party entities for book reviews? Because I know that that's a really scammy type of venture, but it can also, depending on who you go through, can also be kind of beneficial. So I just wanted to know what kind of, what's your perception of those?
Wow. Well, I would tell you from personal experience, and I'm not quite sure if I remember what it was called. I think it might have been called Authors Alliance. There was a website where somebody actually gathered a lot of these different resources, and they kind of rated them and took in reviews so that first-time writers could kind of see, should I submit, should I not? I'll give you a personal example. Thank you. Yeah, Allie, exactly. I think it's Allie. Yeah. I don't know all acronyms. I'm not the perfect editor. But for example, one of the organizations that I was able to get to write a review for my book, they're called the Military Writers Society of America. And they focus on military fiction, nonfiction, as well as some other genres. And they've been doing it for quite a while, and they hold their competitions, and they're very established. Or, for example, sometimes you might have Another organization like Writer's Digest
Mm.
that's been around for a long time. I also submitted my book for review there, and getting feedback first from reviewer 3, and then getting feedback again. So these are some legitimate places that you can take some of this feedback to use for your reviews. Normally, these kind of people or organizations, they just prefer that you credit them with that review. Does that kind of help answer it a little bit for you, Kara?
Yeah, it does. I just know of some authors who they've come to me saying, hey, this, really active blogger is wanting to review my book for $150 or, something like that.
I mean, it's more of a marketing choice, I would say, rather than just reviewing, but it can be something that can increase the vision on your book, potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted, I know that it can be kind of a scam sometimes, depending on who you get it through. But yeah, like Sarah had said, and you guys had mentioned it as well, the Alliance of Independent Authors, I'm a member partner with it as well. They're a good watchdog group. And so they do, they keep tabs on all of the self-publishing companies, independent editors, and the reviewers. But I was just curious as to what you guys had seen as far as paying people to review your books.
I would tell you that that's against Amazon's policy,
Right.
100%. So if you want to risk your book not being listed on Amazon, which is the market leader right now and probably for the future, it's your risk, but I would strongly advise against it as editor.
You mean Amazon saying you cannot go on there and write a review because someone paid you? Is that what you mean?
That's so paid reviews, and I'm not quite sure if their policy also includes reviews from family members or close associates. Mm-hmm. They have a policy on it, and if they find that you violated it, they can just delist your book. So what if you
you go to a reputable reviewing company, I can't remember the ones off the top of my head. You buy a review and you take pieces of that review and put it on the back of the book and then upload to KDP.
That probably is fine. What I think Steven's talking more about is there's certain people that will say, hey, I'll give each of you $50 if you will go and put a review in just the review section. Mm-hmm. So Amazon's looking more at the review section because that fits closely in with their algorithms and all of the search results to bump your book up. And so some people will just try to get those kind of cookie cutter reviews to bump their book up. So yeah, I think what you're saying, Kara, is if someone wants to review it and put that book review on their blog, and that's for $150 or whatever, that's advertising to their audience. And if you want to put a quote, on your cover, that shouldn't make a difference. But it's those actual Amazon specific reviews that's where they have that little more strict guidelines. Because a lot of people, you don't want to you want genuine reviews because that's a reflection on their products. So
for sure. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let me see. I don't know if I've got some comments or questions. Oh, that was just the Alliance of Independent Authors. So we had that. Good thing to check out. Well, anything else as we wrap this up? We probably have time for one more question if anybody has anything. Okay, well, otherwise, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Stephen, as well for joining. At the beginning, I know some people weren't here for the very start, so I have a small little company called 𝗦𝗡𝗟𝗡, and I have created over the last year a self-publishing course. It's a flagship course, so it's a real big course that take writers maybe around a month to go through. Online course that will take you from finished manuscript through all of the different steps until you get to that published book. So if you're interested in learning about author biographies, how to write your book description, getting the ISBNs, making everything official, your copyright, then we go into like the formatting, the inside of your book, your ebook, book cover design, what publishing platforms to consider pricing, getting your proofs together, and then marketing promotion. So that's kind of in a nutshell the whole course. If you're interested in that, I'll put that in the video description that we'll be putting up on the YouTube channel, as well as I'll put all that information in the follow-up email. So thank
Jill,
you guys again.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Thank you very much.
I do have an Instagram that's the Notebook to Real Book Instagram, and then there is my website is up, notebook2realbook.com.
Okay, notebook.
So yep,
okay.
and you can look those up. I've got some free resources. Yeah, and I'm just starting to gather more content for the YouTube channel. So if you follow the social media, you'll be able to see some other talks that I'm hoping to have planned. Stephen was my inaugural or my first talk, so really appreciated him taking the time to do that. And but yes, I will put together also his information. So if you have any other questions, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those as well for you guys. But thank you again, guys, and
Thank
we'll
you.
talk to you
All right.
soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.